In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, I apologize. There's drilling going on in the background on the road. It's not something that comes under the jurisdiction of our building, so that's not something that I can actually control. So, what I'll try to do is move the microphone closer to me so my voice is clearer, but that will invariably be in the background, which is fine. Welcome to another session of Finding God through the Quran, the first book that I'm reading. As a layperson, I'm trying to understand it from a rationalist point of view and trying to ponder the message that is endemic but also evident in the chapter, each chapter. So today we're looking at the daybreak, which is Surah Falaq. In terms of revelation, as you see, it is the 20th chapter, but in terms of arrangement or organization of the Quran, it is the second last chapter. And it's called Surah Al Falaq, and it reads like Qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq. And that is the first verse. And the last chapter of the Quran is titled Surah An-Nas, called mankind, and it reads Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas. So these two chapters together are called the Al-Mawzatan. They're the chapters where we are seeking refuge with God, and they're kind of like a couplet, and there's quite a lot of hadiths, which are quotations relating to the Prophet's life or by the Prophet here, because his wife Aisha Raziyallahu ta'ala anhu says that before he used to go to bed, he would blow on his hands, recite these chapters, and rub his hands all over his body, sort of a protection. We do this even today. This is a practice that has somewhat died down in the 21st century, to recite something, blow on your hand and rub it, especially in the Western world. This is not something that we do as much as we may have used to before. But if you go to South Asia, or if you go to the Middle East, or even China, you'll see people doing this even today. I know my aunt or my mother, every time I'm about to leave home, they recite something and say, and that's just what we believe. You may come at it through quantum physics or kinetics or electromagnetism. You can come at it through very different vantage points and criticize the practice, but I would still defend it, because science is always learning more. So I would never completely rule out the practice. I would argue that maybe it has something that we don't know yet. So these two chapters, the last two, the next one incidentally will be studied next week. These two chapters are part of what is called the Al-Mawzatan, the refuge, and the Prophet would recite it at night before going to bed, and he would tell other people too. There are countless quotations saying, the Prophet told me to recite this, I heard this wonderful verse, and so on and so forth. So as you know, it's only chapter 20, and we have 96 more to go. That's quite a bit. So I will be doing this for the next year or so. I'm guessing even more, next 2 years. So we're still in the early times of Mecca, and as we've been discussing, the Prophet Muhammad's message is getting bigger and bigger. Imagine a pagan family, a non-Muslim, or shall I say a pre-Muslim family, because that's an argument that we can have, whether everyone is born a Muslim or not, and we can get into that later. But let's say a pre-Muslim or pre-Islamic family has been living in Mecca, 5 or 6 people, and one of them decides to convert to Islam. One of them decides to accept Islam as their religion. What happens in the whole family? Well, the eating habits change. The person starts praying. The person dresses differently. The person drinks differently. They don't drink alcohol anymore. They don't worship the same gods. and the same elements that the existing societies would worship. So all of a sudden, there is a split in the family. How would the other family members react? If you can't identify with this, I would recommend bringing it into the 21st century and looking at it politically. If you are a family of left leaning liberal people and one of your family members decides to vote Republican or conservative or votes for Brexit or votes for Trump, how would you feel? You would feel we have established together this set of beliefs and ideals. What's happening? What's happening? The drilling is shaking my building. Anyway, your family would say, we have established this set of ideals and beliefs together, and now one of us is going against it. Why is he doing that? Well, either he is wrong or the person who's convincing him is wrong. I can't hate my son or my daughter or my family member, or maybe I can, but I hate them through some other method. Yeah, I'm not responding to this Twitch message. Thank you, though. Thank you for writing. So you might look at it that way. Same goes for religion. Same goes for sports team. If you've lived in England and you live in a house which supports Chelsea, and one of them suddenly starts supporting Tottenham or Southampton, there will be a huge discord. So this is human nature, to divide and separate based on certain agreements and disagreements. So this was the society that Muhammad was living in at this time. His message was slowly proliferating in society, and people, some of them were coming towards him. Some of them were agreeing with him. Many weren't. And as we've mentioned before, members of his family were opposing him, members of his society were opposing him. He was quite alone until, notwithstanding his wife and his cousin and a few of his close friends, he was quite alone and he was ostracized as compared to how he was before, a well-respected member of society. And now, oh, this person has this message, we have to ostracize him. And then his message kept going forward, because in the beginning, they were trying to bargain with him. They were trying to give him riches and wealth and power and women. They were trying to give him everything just to satisfy him. And he said no. Then they tried to bargain with him. He said no. So now, obviously, they would revolt even more because he's not agreeing. So they would find ways to bring him down. And as mentioned last week, Prophet Muhammad came from a very prestigious and respected family, the Banu Hashim clan. His grandfather, as we discussed last week, was representing Mecca when the invasion came. And his great-grandfather was also a very well-respected person. So when they thought about murdering Muhammad, they can't do in broad daylight. It can't be done. Because then they would know, oh, these are the people who attacked a member of Banu Hashim's clan or of that family, and then they would have to suffer the repercussions. So they would think about doing it in the night. And they would think about all these schemes, and they would think about how to make his life so difficult that he leaves with this message and just goes away. And one of that modes of causing discontent was this practice of tying knots, spitting on them, blowing on them, and causing somebody pain. It is similar to the practice of voodoo, but it's also its own field, and I'm not well informed on it. My only information on it is through the Quran and through these chapters and through Muhammad's life. That is how I know it. But they would do that to him and cause illness and pain and discord and disease, and they would cause him a lot of trouble. Now, again, if you're a scientist, if you're a physicist, if you're a rationalist, you would look at this proclamation and say, really? So they would tie a knot to a doll and blow into it or spit on it, and that would cause a feeling of pain or disease or discord in someone else? I don't buy it. Fair enough. I'm not here to convince you, because that is not the central part of today's conversation or to today's talk, the central part is what God said in response. So I cannot sit here and convince you that something existed or didn't, because scientifically speaking, I don't think we can prove it. So I'm leaving that as it is. I'm not going to argue in favor of it, nor am I going to decry it, because it is written in the book, therefore I believe it. But in response to all that aggression, all that hate, all that envy and hatred and ill will towards Muhammad, God said this in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Say, I seek refuge with God, the Lord of the daybreak, from the evil of what he has created, and from the evil of the darkening night as it comes with its darkness, or the moon as it sets or goes away. That's what it means. And from the evil of those who practice witchcraft when they blow in the knots, which is what I just explained. And from the evil of the envier when he envies. So, that's the chapter. It's a very, very small chapter. And it's meant to be a first section of a couplet, the second section, which I will discuss next week. And it is seeking refuge with God. Refuge against the envier who envies, and from the evil of the envier when he envies. Now, haters gonna hate is a common terminology to describe envy, hatred, jealousy in the 21st century. That's a term that we've come up with. But envy is a human emotion, it is a part of the human experience. You can never divorce it from being human. You can control it, you can manage it, you can watch it inside you as it grows into something. But to live without it is to live without a huge chunk of what it means to be human, because the source of where your envy comes from is also the source where your esteem, your love, your compassion, empathy, they all come from the same source. And while we may be able to identify different sections of neuropathology, which might say, oh, when envy is experienced, this section of the brain is triggered, and when love is experienced, another one. In actual fact, it is not a specified location based experience. The brain is fully functioning as well. It's only one section functions more than the other. So it's a holistic experience when it comes to the body. It is not targeted. While I do appreciate and accept all, or if not all, most arguments by neuropsychologists and neuropathologists, I do raise a concern that it's not just the temporal lobe, it's all the brain, but the temporal lobe is the most highlighted. So when you experience envy, you can't remove it from yourself, you can manage it. You can find ways to curtail it. Now let's be on the receiving end of that envy. Haters are going to hate, or hate is going to hate, is a way of distancing yourself from that human experience. But the receiver, even if there is no metaphysical, as we've been discussing here, aspect to it, to envy someone else is to exhibit or project ill will towards them. It's not a positive feeling. And here in the book, it is saying, it ties into a concept, which is the concept of nazar. And in other cultures, you have similar concepts, which simply means that if you look at somebody with envy, it can cause downfall in them. Therefore, many people are counseled against arrogance, against pride, because it against showing off, because it creates the feeling of envy in others, and the envy might have a negative impact. Now here's the thing. The science that we practice today is less than 1,000 years old. It's been built on Greek thought, fair enough. Some of the Greek thought, some of the thought of the Islamic Golden Age, the alchemists, and some other thought, the post-Enlightenment thoughts, and so forth. But even if I say it's 1,000 years old, the Homo sapien is 180,000 years old. 180,000 years old. So the comparison of our current scientific point of view and the Homo sapien is not comparable. What I've noticed in the Quran or the Bible or other religious books or the Vedas is that they tend to speak about the human being in terms which may remain general throughout. So envy, for example, or things that we discussed last week or the last 20 weeks. But what I'm trying to make a point on here is that while our scientific method or positivist rationalist leanings are encouraging us or facilitating us or forcing us to decry all witchcraft, all metaphysics, and I appreciate that point. When the book is saying that arrogance is not the only source of the downfall, there is something to be said of the envier who is looking at you in that position and envying, like the people in Mecca were doing to the Prophet. I wouldn't dismiss it completely. I'm not saying that I can prove it scientifically, but I wouldn't dismiss it completely, because the book is covering a history that is longer than the last 1,000 years. In fact, the book is almost 1,500 years old. So I wouldn't look at it that way. But I'm not going to sit here and make the argument for you that, oh, yes, there is witchcraft and there's metaphysics, and look, I can prove it. No, I can't. But when it comes to the point of believing in the possibility of existence, I always err on the side of caution and safety, and I believe that it is possible that these things exist. I can neither prove nor disprove them, rather than openly denouncing their existence, because I'm trying to be as flexible and as clear in my thought as possible. So with that in mind, what the book is saying, and from the evil of the envier when he envies, it is very important, and I would argue it is even more important than the witchcraft and the blowing of the knots. There are certain vices that have been discussed in the Quran. One of them in Urdu is called ghibat, and in English we translate it to backbiting or bitching or gossiping or spreading rumors. One of the basic sources of that feeling is envy. Another is hate, jealousy, low self-esteem, self-pity, self-hatred, hatred of others. There's many. But one of the reasons is envy. You envy someone, so you would spread negative information about them. And something was being discussed when it comes to alcohol and this habit of backbiting. Now, in Islam, Muslims don't drink alcohol. If you're following the religion, you can't drink alcohol. It's written clearly. It doesn't align with the teachings of Islam. So if you do drink alcohol, you're not fully aligned with the teachings. I will definitely judge you, but I am no one to pronounce judgment. I will judge you on my own accord, and that is the end of it. So as a Muslim, you're not supposed to drink, according to the book and according to the practice. If you're sitting in a group of people and everyone else is drinking alcohol, as a Muslim, generally, you control yourself, and you are able to do so successfully. There are thousands and thousands of Muslims who socialize with non-Muslims who drink alcohol, and there isn't cross-pollination. There are in some cases, I would say that, but on balance of probabilities, on the whole, Muslims don't indulge. Same can be said for Buddhists. Same can be said for devout Christians. Same can be said for devout Jews or Hindus. Same can be said for anybody on the wagon. Same can be said to a recovering alcoholic. We are able to control ourselves and not indulge, not succumb to alcohol or smoking or eating a certain food that we don't want to eat. All of these things are in our control. If you are a respectful and respectable family man, and you know for a fact that your spouse, your wife in particular, would not appreciate you going to a strip club, chances are you would either do so secretly, which is also questionable behavior, or you wouldn't do so at all, right? Chances are you will control it. And even though you're sitting in a group of friends and they say, we're all going to a strip club and you're coming with us, you'd say, no, my wife doesn't like it. Sorry. Oh, your wife doesn't like it. Oh, I have to prioritize what is important to me. And the wife would do the same. If her friends are trying to force her into something that a spouse doesn't like, she would prioritize and say, whose feelings matter more to me? Does my spouse's feeling matter more, or do my friends' feeling matter more? And the sensible person would obviously choose the spouse based on certain commitments that they've made in whatever religion or culture you're looking at. Gossip, ghibat, backbiting, rumor spreading is so dangerous that you could be vehemently opposed to spreading any negativity about a certain person. But while sitting in a particular company, if everybody else is doing it, invariably you will start stepping into it. Unless you're in love with the person or are very strong friends with the other person or defending them. If you are trying to remain neutral, it sucks you in. It pulls you in. That is the power of envy and hatred and jealousy. They're so incredibly powerful that they can pull you in without you realizing. And all you'll have to say is, if somebody says, well, that person's an idiot. Yeah, and that's it. And you're pulled in. It's just that smooth. That is why it's dangerous. That is why the evil of the envier, who, when he envies, is a danger which we need a lot of protection against, metaphysically, but also practically. If somebody in your office or in your cohort or in your building or in your neighborhood envies you or doesn't like you, they will be spreading information about you that may or may not be true. It is best to try to steer clear of those kind of dangers, because we don't know what is in store for us, which might damage us. I've seen countless marriages and relationships and friendships destroyed based on false information. Happens all the time. It won't be the first, it won't be the last. So, as far as Muslims are concerned, the last two arranged chapters of the Quran are so we try to create some protection against these kinds of dangers. And on that note, I'm going to stop today. Next week, we will be covering the second half of the Al-Mawzidan, which is Surah Nas, which means mankind. In arrangement, it is the last chapter of the Quran, but as you see in Revelation, it's chapter 21. So thank you so much for joining me today. Have a fantastic Friday, have a wonderful weekend, and hope to see you next week.